Hello. Get folks rolling in. Sorry, starting a little late. Just running a little late from the other panels. We'll get Henry. Hello, Henry. Welcome. Thanks so
Thank you.
much for being here. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Oh, cool. We can hear you. Looks like we're just waiting for Amanda to join us. Got folks rolling in. We were able to successfully launch both discussions that are happening, so everything is working out. Yeah, thank you so much to everybody rolling in, spending sort of later in the evening with us. This is the last time slot of the evening, and very excited about this conversation. And just yeah, huge topic, and really, in my personal opinion, I guess one of the cornerstone topics. I don't know exactly the architectural analogy, but one of the key topics of this whole idea of the creative industries and developing the creative economy in New Mexico, um, which is innovating cultural heritage and thinking about who we were and have been in the past, and how that is connected to who we are becoming, and how we can sort of turn that into opportunities for people. So I'm very excited to be joined by a couple very esteemed individuals to sort of guide this conversation in alphabetical order. We've got Henry RAEL, the Director of Strategy and Initiatives at the McCune Foundation, whose, in full transparency, where is it? Here it is. Whose chapter, oh, this isn't going to work with the virtual background, but here, I'm going to do this. Whose chapter in this book, New Mexico 2050, was like a real sort of launch pad for my thinking about this. So we're very excited to be joined by Henry and Amanda Rich as well, a pal of mine and a friend who is the assistant director at Three Sisters Kitchen, which is an incredible organization based in Albuquerque, that is doing this work, literally innovating cultural heritage, and translating cultural heritage into creative economic development. So I think we'll just sort of kick it off, and maybe I'll kick it over to Amanda first to tell us a little bit about Three Sisters Kitchen for folks who don't know about it, what you guys do, and how, I mean, it's it's sort of an easy one. It's sort of a slam dunk because you guys are just perfectly in the sweet spot of translating cultural heritage through the culinary arts, and farming into creative economic development. So welcome, Amanda. Thank you for being here tonight.
Thanks so much for having me, Mike. It's great to be here, and hi to all the folks out there listening tonight. Yeah, I think it would, be helpful to give a little bit of context about the organization and how we do what we do. Um, we are a community health organization. We have a three-part mission that's economic improvement, community health, and bringing our diverse communities together around a shared table. And part of that work is the food business training program that Mike's talking about. So it's a 16-week program where we really give folks the space to experiment with starting a manufactured food business. Our goal is not to launch 20 food businesses a year, but it's to give people access to resources and free commercial kitchen space that might not normally have access. I think there's a myth in entrepreneurial spaces that you have to have money and have capital already to start a business and to be a business owner. And we're hoping to push back against that by giving folks access to free commercial kitchen space and sort of unlimited technical support to really figure out, you know, not just like what their product is and time to practice making it, but also like what is their food story? And that's where we start in the cohort, is talking about our own food stories, our own connection and relationship to food, how it shaped us personally, where we want to take it in a business. And we do this all through a cohort model. And again, that's a little bit different. I think there's a lot of entrepreneurial spaces that are like, everybody for themselves, and I'm going to do this by myself and figure it out all alone. And as someone who has started businesses myself, I wish I would have had a roadmap and a program like this and a cohort and a grove to lean on and bounce ideas off of. So I think those are some of the things that make the program special. We also spend time talking about like, our cultural traditions. We have a food story program at TSK at Three Sisters Kitchen called Cooking for Generations. You can find all those videos on the YouTube channel, but they're really beautiful. Really just food stories of New Mexicans talking about their food traditions, talking about their mother making homemade tortillas when they came home from school. Or one of my favorite bits is Tina Garcia Shams like cutting up green chili with a opened like a can, There's just like some really beautiful moments in this video, so I'd encourage everyone to check them out. But I think one of the things we're also trying to do is sort of interweave our healthy food access, our food storytelling into the curriculum. So it's not just like how to be a business owner and how to like file your taxes and have a chart of accounts, but also really to think about your full self as a business owner and your full self in an entrepreneurial space, and what that means in terms of food and how we are always connecting and relating to food, and how there are these cultural universals and these also really points of shared connection. And at the same time, we can really distinguish ourselves in the marketplace with a food story. Um, I feel like I've already talked too long, so that's that's the overview.
No, I mean, I think, yeah, I mean, I think that that's, yeah, I mean, just that the food story itself and sort of distinguishing through those stories is such a key part of it. And I think sort of rolling into your thinking on this and your writing on this and your work on this, Henry, I mean, just that idea of translating stories into sort of opportunities and whatnot. So maybe if you could tell us a little bit about your background, your work, and your thoughts on this idea of translating cultural heritage into economic opportunity. We have this sort of example that Amanda is here with Three Sisters Kitchen. And so maybe we can, through the framework of that example, zoom out a little bit and think about sort of New Mexico overall as well.
Sure. Yeah. Thank you. Thanks, Amanda. Amanda and I actually have history going back, and it was in actually these kind of industries. So I'll just quickly, I was born and raised here in Albuquerque. After UNM, I moved to Southern California and started my career in the private sector. I worked in the publishing industry for 7 or 8 years, and then I worked in a semiconductor startup that was making Bluetooth chips. So I actually worked in the semiconductor industry for about 13 years doing marketing communications. Moved back to New Mexico after my daughter was born, came back in 2003, and started a nonprofit in the South Valley here that was focused on community scale entrepreneurship. It was called Valle Encantado. And that was where I really started to kind of engage in these ideas. And the main, I guess, the big intersection with Amanda was Agricultura Network. It is a cooperative of small farms that I was a co-founder of, and Amanda got involved early. And it was really kind of trying to carry forward these ideas of like, how can we engage in a modern market while still holding values that were rooted in culture and heritage. So I think the Amanda and I were chatting a little bit recently about this, and I just want to put a definition I think would be helpful for me in terms of talking about this, of how I think what culture is. For me, culture is people plus place plus time. So when people live in a place and have a relationship with that place over a period of time, that relationship is what culture is. And so you can see how a lot of what Amanda was talking about, and I think one of the key things that really drives relationship is story. I think story and relationship are deeply connected and deeply intertwined. And the way that I've approached thinking about enterprise development, and even in my job in working in philanthropy and looking at how foundations can behave, it always comes back to questions of culture, questions of place, and questions of relationship. So I think that, like when we were preparing for this talk, I was like, oh, well, how to do this, what are the steps to do it? And where I really ended up is that it's not about like learning like the tricks of cultural heritage or enterprise creation. It's really about a mindset and maybe a heart set if that's a thing, because I think it's more than your mind. It's really about making a commitment to a place, and since we're talking about New Mexico, to this place, and having a relationship with it. And what does that mean to have a relationship with a place? It means responding to it, paying attention to it, looking at what its needs are, and looking at what its assets are, and then finding space there to sort of fill a need in terms of creating a business. Um, like I think that's my high level story of like how I got engaged in these things in thinking about this.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, and that makes a lot of sense. Like, and I'm sort of wondering, as you sort of as you think about like you said, like this heart space and this place is New Mexico. Like, what do you feel it is about New Mexico specifically? Because certainly in my life, there isn't another place I've gone in this designation of states, however useful that designation is, right? Like in the United States, where I feel so immediately in touch with thousands of years, right? And in your travels, and really for both of you, coming and going to, and from New Mexico, what do you feel is special about New Mexico as a place that when people are like telling these food stories, going through this program, for example, they are bringing that isn't happening anywhere else? Does that make sense? I know it's kind of abstract, but
I mean, it's something I think about all the time because I feel like New Mexico is a really special place. And I often point to the fact that, there was a resistance to colonization. And so there are families living on traditional homelands for thousands of years that you just don't see in very many places in the United States. And I think there's also these rich histories and these rich traditions that like have not been whitewashed, have not been colonized, have not been homogenized in a way. So there are these distinct points, but I think um, in that, in that multicultural space that's sort of naturally existing already, then there creates space for other cultures to enter. Like we work with all kinds of folks. We work with refugee families who have just moved to the area and who want to bring their food and their food traditions to New Mexico. We work with folks who've, families have lived here for hundreds of years. And I think that having that that lack of colonization to begin with creates an opening for other cultures to exist. And then with that multicultural space already existing, new waves of folks can come in and introduce their food traditions. And there's already an openness because everything isn't just one way. Does that make sense? That's a guess.
yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I mean, and that melding, right, like things that haven't been gotten bulldozed, colonized, whitewashed, but still have this sort of like porousness or whatever. Is maybe not the right word, but like that still have this sort of like readiness to interact. Yeah. Does that
There's
resonate
a
with you? Sorry,
I
go
think there's
ahead.
an openness here, right?
Yeah.
There's an openness and a welcomeness and a flexibility. Like this is our a joke with one of my best friends. It's like you go to the DMV, you get invited to the quinceañera. Like this is a part of the culture of New Mexico. People say like, "Oh, I'm from the South," and we say the South is friendly, but Albuquerque's really friendly, right? So I think there's this feeling, right, of welcomeness and openness that is really rare.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree, and I do think that it's culture, and like I say culture, I don't say the culture. You know, the culture here is unique. I think every culture is unique because it's a response and it's a relationship to a place. So every place is going to have a different culture because it's a relationship. But because the culture here has persisted for so long, it's embedded. I think it really like the people who live here and have lived here for multiple generations, they are oriented towards that relationship. You know, they understand that the food that they eat it because it's what grows here and it's what has grown here. And the songs and the stories and the art, all of that is influenced and in relationship to this place. So I think that that's like when you go to like a large urban center where people are transient and they haven't been there, you know, for me, by my definition of culture, there's the culture that's it's not deep, it's not a relationship to a place, it's about obliteration of place, it's about creating new place, creating something different. And so that sort of implicitly is not open, it's not relatable. So I think like when you that feeling of coming here, being here, you just that for me is what you feel is you feel the depth of the relationship to the place. And when you have that kind of grounding, it's a little easier to open yourself up to other people, to relate to other people.
I'm interested in like with the folks who've come through your program, Amanda, like is it mostly folks who are from New Mexico, or is it mostly folks who are not, or is what's the sort of breakdown?
Yeah, I mean, it is a wide swath of folks.
Yeah.
The demographics from age, race, um, is really like a very, very wide swath. And some, we curate our cohort, so we have many more applicants than we can bring through the program. And so we're able to really think about collaborations with culture or with food or with shared interests like fermentation, right? So we're able to, curate a cohort that really is, definitely unique and um, I think that it's extremely diverse. We're trying to focus on folks who don't have access, right? And so, um, we are like largely women, largely people of color in the cohort. And I think something that, but I think it's worth saying, right? I think someone said it earlier, like, how important story is in this context, right? Because how do we create connection with each other? How do we create trust? And our brains as humans are hardwired to respond to shared meals and to stories in the same way, right? Like the brain chemistry reacts in the same way if you share a meal together or if you're storytelling together. And I just think that's so juicy, that detail, and it's how we are like building trust and building community. And some, we have people from very divergent backgrounds and walks of life. And it's always interesting because, in the beginning, there's like, there's the ice that needs to break, but then by the time we get to graduation, there is um, a real kinship and a real trust that's built. That is, I think, honestly, one of the most valuable things that the program can provide, right? So that you're not just out there. The first years of being a business owner are really hard. There's a lot of challenges. It keeps you up at night, the finances, making the pieces work, all of the things that can go wrong or be challenging or that you're new at and in a learning and a growing space. And just having that kinship, having that connection, having folks that you can call who are, literally going through the same steps as you, filing the same paperwork, getting the same health permit, facing the same challenges with difficult market customers or fulfilling orders. Having that network of support, I honestly think is like one of the most powerful things that the program and the cohort provides for folks.
I'm curious in those folks who go through the cohort, right? And then a lot of those products are then like they're trying to export them outside of New Mexico, right? Like they're trying to,
Well,
or is it mostly, is that not true?
so, I mean, we are not defining success for folks. They're defining it for
Right.
themselves. And so for some, we have every product that folks want to produce has to have at least one locally sourced ingredient. That's so we can, contribute to our local farmers and our local food system. It's a requirement, at least one locally sourced ingredient in every food item. And so we have a significant number of farmers who come through the program who are trying to create a stream of value-added products. It's going to create an income stream in the winter. It's going to take care of excess waste on the farm. And so, I would say that this cohort was maybe like a quarter farmers, but in the past we've had up to like half of farmers going through the members of going through the cohort. For them, success is creating a product they can have on their market stand seasonally. So that's not probably ever going to be an export product, right? A lot of people,
Right.
point to Heidi's Jam as a successful model of a small grower who has scaled up. Um, I think that is not everyone's definition of success, and we're definitely letting folks define success for themselves. So some people, they want to be in grocery store shelves. They want to be in all the
Right.
Sprouts, the Smiths, the Albertsons, the whatever, the Whole Foods,
Right.
And some people like success would be selling at the farmers markets 2 or 3 days a week. We have, direct to consumer, so no wholesale accounts, right? So we really let folks define success for themselves. And while we do have a few folks whose products are being shipped out of state now or internationally, it's never like our push. It's always their trajectory. They can always ask us questions. How do I get there? What do I need now? What does this mean? But it's really 100% up to them, like where the finish line is.
Right. And then with that, like you said, because we're talking about food, there is like just this natural tendency to go closer with the people that you're around instead of imagining that food you're making is being eaten by strangers very far away, right?
And we
And
definitely have ambitious folks, right? So like, don't
right,
get me wrong. There's people who like want to be international and who are dipping their feet into those waters, but I don't think it's for everyone. Not everybody wants to scale to that size. Maybe they just want to be supplemental income, or maybe they want to have, employees and a brick and mortar, but like it's really all over the map, to be honest.
right.
And
I
we're okay with
guess
that, obviously.
yeah, yeah, no, I
Yeah.
mean, and that's great. And I really appreciate you saying that because I think where my mind was going on that was sort of like as people leave, because culinary traditions in New Mexico are such a part of New Mexican identity, right? And so like as these products or services or models leave New Mexico, like what do they carry with them to like tell the story of like quote unquote New Mexico where they go elsewhere, And but it's also true that part of the story of New Mexico is the way that people stick together locally, like, and that sort of is reflected, I think, in you saying like, the way that people define success. And then sort of piggybacking off of that, some of the work that you've done, Henry, is about leaning into these agricultural traditions in New Mexico, right? Like, and cooperative agriculture, right? And like drawing on these really, really old legacies and heritage of cooperative agriculture and trying to sort of figure out how to turn that heritage into collective prosperity, right? So maybe you could, because I think that sort of ties into what Amanda's saying about, yeah, we define success our own way because like you work with like the agricultural cooperative network and everything. You've tapped into like the heritage of New Mexico to help, right? Like folks define success for themselves.
Yeah, yes, exactly. And I think, this is the metaphor is like so apt of the acequia system. It's, it's the oldest example of a democratic institution in the continental North America that we have. And the important thing about it is that it's a structure. So it's a structure that has a physical manifestation. It has people that are connected to it and who have interest in benefiting from it, but also in supporting it. Everybody owns it together, and there's rules. There's rules about how it functions, and it's really about everyone agreeing to what those rules are and then sort of following those rules. So that is a cultural piece of our heritage of sort of understanding the power of agreements and cooperating with each other. So that's a very old structure. And my work in the last 12 years has been in the nonprofit sector. I've really haven't been, I've been more in the nonprofit as opposed to the private sector. But at the McCune Foundation, for example, we've looked at that concept a lot. You know, like for example, we've done a lot of work around pooled funding in the last several years, and the nonprofit sector is complicated because
Can you tell us a
philanthropy.
little bit about what that means for folks who might not, like that might not, yeah, they might not
Sure,
know
yeah.
exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, so so like the way a lot of the funding, a big funding source for nonprofits is government, but another big source is private philanthropy. Those are foundations that have money to give grants to nonprofits. One of the biggest challenges that nonprofits face is that foundations often operate in silos. They have their own individual strategies, they have their own boards, they have their goals, they have their way of doing things, they have their perspective on how to solve problems. So an organization, and Amanda, who works at a nonprofit, is smiling and giving that sort of knowing look. It's a big challenge to figure out if you have a budget of $1 million and each foundation is going to give you 25,000. How do you finesse and cobble that together? So what a lot of the work that I've been focused on at the McCune Foundation is to kind of actually put it on the foundations to say, how can we as foundations create structures that enable us to get what we need, but on the back end is much friendlier to the nonprofit sector. And the example I'd give of that is the Native American Recovery Fund, which is a pooled fund. 14 foundations, national foundations, local foundations have contributed money to this. But the key was, how can we give grants to Native-led organizations that are working towards pandemic recovery? How can we do multi-year grants? So that's kind of rare. Most foundations don't do multi-year grants. How do we do unrestricted grants? So most foundations require a lot of restrictions on the money they give you. They want you to use it in certain ways. But individually, these foundations couldn't give grants this way, but through the pooled structure, they could. So that I think is a piece that, again, we're doing this in the nonprofit sector, but it's also what we talked about earlier of a cooperative agricultural system. It's the same thing. It's like, how do we look at a bunch of individuals? How can we look at the market, look at what the opportunities are, what the challenges are, and create structures that allow us to collectively address those things so that we can all benefit?
Yeah. I mean, that's really, really beautifully said. And I put a link to the Native American Recovery Fund Zone grant in the chat for folks. And it also, your discussion of the fact that you were talking about structures strikes me that one part of the creative industries and the creative economy, in addition to the art that is produced in the form of products and services, is this idea of creativity and innovation in models. And what's so cool about what you're describing is that it's a model that is drawing from the cultural heritage, right? And it's an innovative model because it's looking, and like you said at the beginning, Amanda, like New Mexico's a place where old solutions are maybe, didn't get as like buried or whatever, right? Which is reductive way to put it, but you know what I'm saying. And so, and it strikes, the conversation before this was about forming cooperatives and collectives, which is something that creatives and artists are doing everywhere, but it strikes me like, how are New Mexicans doing it differently, and why, and how is that based on what they're drawing from what it means to be here in the culture that's already here, and also, I've been doing this a lot, but shout out to Saturday at 2 p.m. Just on this exact topic. We've got community-based economic development solutions for shared prosperity. Creative entrepreneur Kayvon Kalabari from Raton, who's a farmer, and a creative entrepreneur, and then the executive director of the Alliance for Local Economic Prosperity, Angela Merkert, are going to be in conversation with each other. But let me ask you both on this topic of models, like, which is kind of esoteric, but it's 7 o'clock at night, so we're allowed to get into the esoteric part. What are other models in New Mexico that are maybe based around this cultural heritage that are really unique and that could be turned into things like this example you gave, Henry, of the way that grants are dispersed in the nonprofit world, right? Like, what are some other models that are just maybe sitting there that people aren't noticing in New Mexico that are really exciting and creative? Does that make sense as a question?
I mean, it's a great question. Henry, great.
I can point to and going actually to our shared history, Amanda, with Agricultura Network, um, we developed La Cosecha, which is a community supported agriculture program. So the that model, the idea of community supported agriculture, has been around for a while. And essentially the way it traditionally works is that you would have a relationship with an individual farm and you would provide some capital to them up front at the beginning of their season so they could have access to capital. And then they could use that capital to grow their crops. And then as they're harvesting every week, because you bought a share in their farm or in their harvest, you get a bag of fresh produce from the farm. So, it facilitates the relationship. It does these things. So what we were looking at was how could that model be riffed upon, And so La Cosecha, the concept, there was kind of two things. One was how could we do an aggregated CSA rather than having an individual farm that, how could we create an aggregated product where multiple farms would bring their produce to the South Valley Economic Development Center, and basically divvy it up into shares. Instead of paying one large amount at the beginning of the year, subscribers would just pay on a weekly basis. The other part that was important was how could it be affordable? How could it be affordable but not require the farmer to be the one that has to take the hit? We looked at different models around creating access to food stamps and SNAP benefits and connecting that, looking at health systems and funding that they had available for prevention that could be applied. And so the model essentially did that. It had two different pricing structures, one for yuppies like me who can afford to pay the full weekly amount, and then another structure for folks who can't afford that, who are eligible for other kinds of benefits. So they're paying $15, or back when we started it, I don't know what the price is now, $15 a week, where I was paying $40 a week. It was the same produce. The farmer got paid the same amount, whether the radishes went in my bag or went in the other bag. And it basically expanded. I don't know how many users they have now, but when I sort of stepped away from it, I think it was close to 300, 400 families that were getting produce through this mechanism every week. So that's an example of a structure that allows multiple farmers to participate, allows them to build relationships with their customers, allows customers to gain access, and it's all by just following a schedule and kind of like going along with these sort of rules that were agreed upon. So that's one example that kind of comes to mind.
I think it's really interesting that when we have models, which is basically sharing resources, it's like revolutionary in like a capitalist system that's like everyone for themselves, everybody has their own stuff. The farmers, when I was farming in the South Valley, like we shared tools, tractors, tillers, labor. When people needed to pull all their garlic, we all showed up at the garlic farm and pulled together. Like it was just like really integrated, and I see it happening naturally with our entrepreneurs too. A great example is like the cost of like glass bottles for hot sauce or salsa, very expensive for shipping, but if you reach minimums, the shipping's free, you get a lower price the more you buy. So we see folks going in together, like, oh, when are you putting your packaging order in? Like, let me jump in on that. Like, we can share the costs, or maybe we'll get free shipping if we order enough. And like, um, yeah, I think that this, basic idea of sharing, which is so simple, right, is so revolutionary or against the usual grain of how business as usual operates.
Let me ask you guys, let me turn it back to art because I totally agree with you, Amanda, like that it shouldn't be so revolutionary to share things, right? And even this idea that you're talking about, Henry, makes me think about like, manifesting with like art co-ops, not art co-ops, but like art CSAs, right? Like
Hmm.
which is a thing that happens in certain places. But then it makes me think about the individual artist as a producer and just how different, no matter how like cute you like stretch the analogy, just how different that is. And the artistic life, how different that is than these like community kind of agriculture you're talking about. But I also wonder, like, is that the way it has to be? Like, does the artist have to be in that kind of isolation? And I wonder how some of these ideas maybe translate, because one thing that's been happening that I've noticed across all these conversations is that people who are running things that are a little bigger than themselves are constantly saying, like, yeah, you just got to listen to the needs of the community. Like if it's a youth-based organization, you got to find out what the community wants, which in some ways, or if you're, doing uh, tools, and doing like media production tools, like you got to see like what kinds of projects are people asking for, not just what are you yourself interested in making. And I'm just sort of curious about your thoughts, like how in your, because I know Amanda, like you are also an artist, and Henry, you're a writer. Um, like, how have you found that kind of ego artist part of yourself fits into this rest of like sharing New Mexico cooperative kind of heritage part of your life? Does that make sense?
I think it depends on the kind of art because I'm thinking of like a shared pottery studio I was a part of for a while where it was people learning, but also sharing kilns, sharing shelf space, sharing glazes, right? Like, again, like pooling resources and also having multiple wheels in a room so people can throw together and be social. But as a writer, like it's helpful to have a community to check in with, but the majority of my writing needs to be done around other people because if there's another person in the room, I'm going to be talking to them, not writing. So I think sometimes, um, and in my experience with visual art, it was a very solitary activity. And so I think it's interesting to think about like what would a shared studio space for painters look like, for example, when I know that my main thing is like, needing to focus or work on that creative process.
Yeah. Um, I would give a shout out to oh
Our youngest panelist.
yes, exactly.
Mom life.
We'll turn it over to you now. Shout out to Carlos Contreras, who has really put a lot of effort into thinking about some of these pieces. So I think it's interesting, and like the life of of art is so different in the sense that like you said, the creation piece can be very solitary. Um, the other piece is that I think that for working artists, it's really challenging to derive all of your income from just the sale of your work. And so a lot of times creatives have to find other ways of generating income. A lot of them work in the nonprofit sector, pursue grants, work on projects together. One of the opportunities that I've sort of observed is like with the CSA description that I talked about earlier, we had to hire people that were good at math, people that knew how to use spreadsheets, There's a lot of very sort of administrative, technical stuff that can not feel creative, and a lot of creatives aren't necessarily drawn to those pieces. But I think that's an opportunity, and a missing piece is, how do we create structures that can bring those capacities to our creatives, that can write the grants, that can do the reporting, that can keep track of who earned what and pay the taxes and file all of that stuff. I think that is greenfield opportunity space, for people who want to work in the creative economy, but maybe don't consider themselves artists per se, but want to figure out how they can participate in that economy, and in a way that's adding real value, I think, to the work of other people.
Yeah, totally. And it also makes me think that there's a real role for the creative industries division to play in making some of those administrative tasks, which have cultures of their own that are received from the outside. You guys both, as non folks working in nonprofit, know just how much, it's just a ritual, it's ritualized, right? And I think there's a role to play for the creative industries division in enabling sort of culturally responsive versions of all this stuff you're talking about. Like, have this conversation all the time with Stephen Fadden at the Poe Center, about grants, right? And about reporting that fits the way that these programs actually make impacts in people's lives. And to tell that story is one thing, but to try to bend it to the conventions of reporting is quite another, and it ends up being sort of absurd, and it also makes me think about, like, all the ways, like, we had a great panel earlier with Jen Joy Robal, and Lauren Kaysen about sort of advanced art tools and AR and XR, and we were talking about, like, what sort of artistic practices you can bring to the technology part. So it's like, what can the artists also bring to the math, right? Um in and I'm curious, so, like, as you've interacted, Amanda, with culinary entrepreneurs, right? Entrepreneurs who are passionate about culinary arts, I imagine you've run into folks who are exactly as Henry describes, who are, like, really, really good at their art, but who are just like sort of wither away at some of the stuff that you just, in this culture, society, whatever, you have to know how to do to be able to play the game. And how do those, I mean, like, what is a path that you've seen people take that isn't just like, oh, well, either you get good at it or you just fail, which sucks, right? Like,
I mean, I think that we offer a lot of like wraparound services, so support. I think the two things I see is like accounting and bookkeeping is a real, like, not something people naturally know how to do, and also like making a website, like a really important tool to market yourself and to get your product out there, right? And those are the two pieces I see that folks need a lot of support in, or we try to offer pathways for people to meet a bookkeeper, like actually pay for hours with that person to set up a chart of accounts to get them through the first year of taxes. One of the most popular, like, postgraduate workshops we have is like a tax filing party, or like taxes demystified, because I think this stuff is just so complicated in people's minds. But today in 2024, there's these really helpful tools where you don't need to be a bookkeeper. And if you have a simple business structure, some of it you can do yourself with software that's really easy, plug and play, asking you questions to create like the framework, rather than having to know how to write code or know tax law as it changes every year, right? So I think those are the two places where I see that like people need support. But I just like want to go back to that permaculture design idea that things will pop up and flourish where there's a hole. And I think it's a really interesting thing that I think about a lot. Like, it was hard to find a contract accountant who knew a lot about small business bookkeeping, New Mexico small business, and what people needed, and was able to meet folks where they were at, break things down, really be an educator as well as a bookkeeper, and work on those tools of like financial literacy and like technical skills at the same time. And wow, we could really use some, more folks popping up and covering the earth and springing up and fixing the holes in the canopy, just like the plants and the trees do. I think that's a real fertile ground for someone to plant a business, just putting it out there.
What specifically around that kind of accounting?
Yeah, small business
Yeah.
bookkeeping for a single, LLC entrepreneur in New Mexico, that's also, has the soft skills and the desire to work with people on, literacy and education in the process, right? So it's not just like, I'll file your taxes for you and here's my fee, but like, I'll show you how to use this program so that it's not super hard or complicated every year for you to do this on your own.
Right, right,
But
right.
also,
And
I think
it's
it's a myth that as a business owner, you have to be good at all these things. And I really like to give people permission to outsource the pieces that they absolutely hate or don't want to do. Like, I think it's absolutely okay that you don't have to be good at 12 different things to be a business owner. And I think that's like a misconception.
yeah. No, I mean that makes a lot of sense. And I think that like that kind of siloing um is pretty endemic probably across all, like this small business culture where you just think, oh, I'm a failure because I don't know how to do every single thing. And you look at someone who's a quote unquote success and you think, oh, they must be really good at everything. When in reality, they have this help, they have that help, you know. And it also like I don't know if this is again too esoteric, but like you mentioned the tax filing party and I mean that makes sense. You can have a tax filing party anywhere, right? It's not culturally specific. But it for some reason it hit in my head this something that I had this conversation with Dr. Patricia Trujillo, who's the Deputy Cabinet Secretary of Higher Education, and she told me about, and I'd never heard of this before, but as my ignorance, La Resolana, which is the place where the sun shines, and it's like where the village gathers, because that's the warm place in the winter to sort of gab and hash things out. And it's it's specific, but it's like every culture has their version of it or whatever, right? It's the idea. And I wonder about like even what you just said, Amanda, about like, okay, here's a business idea, right? Like to small business bookkeeping, but in New Mexico, if there's ways of like being that kind of business that are based around some of the like doing it creatively, right? Like based around the people's particular cultural heritage here. Um, and I agree with you that seems like such a real fertile ground. And you said fertile ground, you said green space, Henry, sort of the same thing, I guess, right? Um, and maybe, as we sort of wind up here, maybe just sort of continuing on that track as you guys are thinking about it, like what other kinds of businesses that could be done more creatively, you think, in New Mexico based on what you've seen, working with entrepreneurs, working in nonprofits? Like what is sort of like a boring business that you think in New Mexico specifically could be done more creatively and more interestingly? Does that make sense as a question?
Yeah. I mean, I think it's like any business, like I think of like so first of all, like just to quickly go back to the whole bookkeeping and accounting piece. I mean, it feels to me like a uniquely New Mexico way to do it would be for the state to actually try to play a more strategic role in that. So
Hmm.
right now, bookkeeping.
Why is that? Why would that be uniquely New Mexican?
Well, because first of all, bookkeepers are at a premium. It's really, really difficult. I mean, there's a really great nonprofit that McCune has supported for a while because the McCune Foundation, for example, really buys into this concept of creating supports, for nonprofits, but I wonder how it could happen in the private sector. So, for example, we were very active in looking at sort of like what capacities were really needed that could be developed. Like 10 years ago, we looked at communications for nonprofit, and so we incubated a PR firm, which is today's called Media Desk, and basically, because we incubated it with the intention around serving nonprofits, we were able to look for leaders who shared that orientation. I think Media Desk is the second biggest communications firm in the state now. Um, and
Wow.
they only work with nonprofits
Wow.
and government agencies. They figured out how to do that, and they figured out how to retain talent. So it's not that they're just like saying, "Hey, we're going to just charge minimum amounts of money," because that's what's happening for example, there's a nonprofit that plays a similar function around finance for nonprofits called 501 CPA. And their biggest challenge is retaining talent because they're always playing this sort of game of like, how do you keep the price low enough so that the
Right.
nonprofits can afford it. But it is possible to create models like what Media Desk has done, where they are able to retain top flight talent, but still, by the ways that they set up their pricing structure, make their services affordable to the nonprofits that couldn't afford it otherwise. So, so what I'm saying is that by applying creativity, by taking the resources that the state has, the state gives lots of funding to nonprofits who support entrepreneurs. Is there a way for the state to, make a commitment? That's the biggest challenge. The commitment over time to provide support to organizations that can support entrepreneurs, and do it in a way that creates for me, that's like an acequia system. You know what I mean?
Right.
It's something that we would collectively own. We would all benefit from it, and
Right.
we'd all have to be willing to invest in it.
Right. Collectively owned through like the state, the idea of being a citizen of the state, paying taxes, all that. Yeah. That's really interesting. Yeah. I mean, I think that is specifically thinking about the creative industries, like that seems like a really viable, um, yeah, that seems like a really viable path for like one of the roles of the creative industries division. Um, and I like that you brought it back to that acequia culture, because I think that it's also, you talk about buy-in, right? And like what you can convince people is possible. And the fact that in New Mexico, there's already this culture, and you can say like, it's like an acequia, and they're like, oh, okay, well, if it's like an acequia versus like, it's a co-op, or, it's like, I don't know about your fancy words there. Let me, as we're sort of winding up, and I, again, really appreciate both of you taking this time. I feel like this has been one of our more sort of intellectual panels, which is really cool. I'm not that the other ones aren't intellectual, but just that we've really like we've been on this like level of abstraction that is like kind of cool to live in and let me ask you both about like the future, right? So the topic cultural heritage is not just about the past, right? It's about preservation, it's about the future. So what are some of the sort of the future of your work right now, and the things that you're most sort of ambitiously dreaming about and excited about, um, sort of along all these lines of everything we've been talking about?
Yeah, I think that I'm in food systems work because I want to see everyone have food on their table. I think the only person you need 3 times a day is a farmer, and I'm deeply curious to how we support them, but also how we create a system of food distribution that serves our community. There's 200,000 pounds of food waste every week going to be composted, rather than people's bellies. And I think we have some real pieces to look at there. And I'm curious on like both, on all these levels of like climate change, carbon emissions, food waste, and food insecurity in our community, like how we can put those dots together. I think we're also, organizationally thinking a lot about radical accessibility and what does that mean and what does that look like? And if we build a community space around food and stories, how do we build a space that where everyone feels welcome to join the table? Um, and so I know that like these, speaking of esoteric topics and being like really on this level, I think these are the the future New Mexico that I envision. There's no children that are hungry, and we are all welcome in the kitchen.
That's really beautiful. And also like, I mean, that idea of environmental resilience and New Mexico as a model of environmental resilience and creative solutions to like the same problems that everybody else is already running into or is gonna run into, around water, around especially, right? And yeah, I think you really hit the nail on the head there. Like New Mexico has this opportunity to really steer some very future forward thinking because it is facing the problems now, you know? Yeah.
Yeah.
What would you say, Henry? Like as far as the future of your work? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely our young people. I think at this point in my career and just kind of like looking and having raised young people here in New Mexico, just clearly the education system is failing. It was never this, we talk about our cultural heritage, the way that we educate our young people is not compatible with our cultural heritage. It's not about reciprocity. It's not about relationship. It we put our young people in this building that's separated from community. And shout out to Future Focus Education, a great nonprofit here who I think is pretty visionary in terms of how they're thinking about education. I feel like there's just going to be a lot of opportunity there. I'd love to see ways that entrepreneurs can start taking more ownership on this topic, because we need more people engaged and thinking about our young people. I'm not just saying like 12-year-olds. I'm saying like young people up to their early 20s. I mean, they're inheriting a world that is pretty disconnected from our cultural heritage, and I think that it's really incumbent on us to find ways and to be creative about figuring out how to bring those things into closer alignment.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that makes so much sense. And it reminds me earlier today, this evening, we had a discussion about youth programs, right? And youth creative development. We had True Kids One, Moving Arts Espanola, and the Zuni Youth Enrichment Project. And really wonderful organizations doing really wonderful work. And something that Elroy from the Zuni Youth Enrichment Project mentioned was their focus, like on multi-generational programs. Like that for them, a youth-focused program is a multi-generational program. And I was like, wow, that's so smart. And that's so like this area, right? Like, like New Mexico and the all the places, the sovereign nations that exist within the geographic bounds of New Mexico, right? Um, and yeah, I think that that's such a also just sort of a beautiful image that you're bringing up, Henry, about education existing in community, education existing relationally, um, and yeah, education existing multi-generationally and not losing that cultural heritage by putting those folks together more. And yeah, I think you're right. It's definitely a creative entrepreneurship opportunity. Um, yeah, it's cool also because it's like, that's cultural heritage right there. It's like a nice image to end on, right? Like your elders and your young, like learning from each other. It's pretty cool. It's pretty cool. So yeah, thank you both so much for having this chat tonight and taking time out of your evening and family coming through. And yeah, just really cool, really, really fun to talk to both of you. And it's really, I hope for the folks in the panel or the folks in attendance, everybody stayed the whole time and no one asked anything. I don't know what that means. I don't know what that means, but yeah, I was pretty fascinated the whole time and I'm just someone just asked something at the end. Oh, thank you. Great conversation. So maybe if people were just enchanted. Oh, we have another. Is that the same question? It's the same question. Cool. Um, yeah, just really cool and really excited about both of your work and encourage folks watching to go check out everything the McCune Foundation is doing and to go check out everything Three Sisters Kitchen is doing. Get involved. be in community, learn more about all the different cultural, like you said at the beginning, Henry, right? All the different cultural heritages of this place. And yeah, thank you both so much for taking time to do this. It was really, really great talking to you. Thank you, Amanda. Thank you, Henry.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah. All right. And we'll see everybody tomorrow for more. All right. Thank you so much. Take care. Have a great night. Eat some good food.